Introduction by Rob Sewell. Lenin's book, What Is to Be Done, is a Marxist classic on the building of a revolutionary party. It is also the text most criticized by reformists and academics alike for supposedly planting the seeds of totalitarian dictatorship. An example of the vitriol poured on Lenin is the following by the historian Anthony Reid in his book, The World on Fire. Bolshevism was founded on a lie, setting a precedent that was to be followed for the next 90 years. Lenin had no time for democracy, no confidence in the masses, and no scruples about the use of violence. He wanted a small, tightly organized, and strictly disciplined party of hardline professional revolutionaries who would do exactly as they were told. This open hatred should not surprise us, but nothing could be farther from the truth. While Marx has thrown a few compliments about his analysis of capitalist crisis by bourgeois commentators, Lenin has no such redemption. He is relentlessly attacked and slandered by an unholy alliance. The reason for this is that Lenin built a party that was able to carry out the socialist revolution and gave an example to the workers of the world how, concretely, capitalism could be overthrown. Ever since, the bourgeois have attempted to bury the real essence of Lenin's work and promote the idea that Stalinism and Leninism are essentially the same thing. This idea enjoys the joint approval of liberals, Democrats, reformists, idealists, pragmatists, and anarchists alike. Regardless of these unfounded slanders, What Is to Be Done has an important place in Marxist literature, and is a major landmark in the history of Russian Marxism that needs to be studied seriously by those who want to change society. The reason why this work has not been given sufficient attention may be due to the fact that the book contains an exaggeration, where the author bent the stick too far in stating that the working class left to itself can only arrive at a trade union consciousness. This is clearly not the case. History has shown many times, starting with the Chartists, that the working class in struggle can indeed arrive at a socialist consciousness. In fact, as the book shows, Lenin had borrowed this idea from Karl Kautsky, the then leader of the German Social Democracy and the Second International. The fact is that after this single reference, Lenin never again repeated this mistaken formulation, and even within the pages of the work, admits that this is sharply simplified and a blunt formula, which he used to attack the opportunistic deviation of the Russian economists, a right-wing trend within the movement at the time that in effect denied the role of a revolutionary party. Despite this one exaggeration, Lenin's What Is to Be Done contains a wealth of knowledge on the importance of a revolutionary party, which today deserves much greater study. In fact, Krupskaya, Lenin's wife and co-worker, urged its study by everyone who wants to be a Leninist in deeds and not words. From the Reminiscences of Lenin, page 66. The book was published in early 1902 to great acclaim within the Marxist circles of Russia. What Is to Be Done was a great success, explained Krupskaya. It supplied the answers to a number of vital and pressing questions. Everyone keenly felt the need for an underground organization working according to a plan. The pamphlet was an ardent appeal for organization. It outlined a broad plan of organization in which everyone would find a place for himself, become a cog in a revolutionary machine. A cog which, no matter how small, was vital to the working of the machine. Lenin's work was an important contribution in this early period of a Russian revolutionary movement. It should be read in conjunction with his other articles of the same period, in particular, Where to Begin, which is complementary to What Is to Be Done. In fact, Where to Begin opens with this statement. In recent years, the question of what is to be done has confronted Russian social democracy with a particular instance. It is not a question of what path we must choose, as was the case in the late 80s and early 90s, but of what practical steps we must take upon the known path and how they shall be taken. It is a system and a plan of practical work. I'm taking that in the 80s and 90s, this is a question of reformism or revolution. That might be wrong, but Lenin's later work was simply a development of these basic ideas. Ideological clarity. A fight had already been waged for some time for ideological clarity with disputes between Marxism and populism, the latter of which espoused not class struggle but individual terrorism. And then with the advocates of legal Marxism, which had abandoned the revolutionary essence of Marxism. The dispute taken up in Lenin's book was with the opportunism of economists, which had become prominent. It was through these ideological battles that Russian Marxism took shape. It should be clear from Lenin's writings that the development of a revolutionary party is a complex process that goes through different stages and takes shape over a number of years and even decades. Its birth pangs can be painful, and it is subject to continuous crystallization, regroupings, and even splits before emerging as a mass force. What is to be done was part of this crystallization. It can be said that Lenin's work has particular importance for today, given, on the centenary of the Russian Revolution, the attacks on Lenin and Leninism as well as the political backsliding of present-day various sectarian groups. Having burnt their fingers on their ultra-leftism, these groups then abandoned all hope and dashed in an opportunist direction. This is a particular characteristic of the Socialist Workers' Party, a supposedly Leninist organization which over the years established popular front organizations such as the Anti-Nazi League, Respect, the Stop the War Coalition, and Stand Up to Racism, where there was no mention of a socialist program for fear of alienating their liberal supporters. Socialist Workers' Party. That was United States Trotskyist Party. This is a particular characteristic of the Socialist Workers' Party, a supposedly Leninist organization, which over the years established popular front organizations such as the Anti-Nazi League, Respect, the Stop the War Coalition, and Stand Up to Racism, where there were no mention of a socialist program for fear of alienating their liberal supporters. The SWP's anti-imperialist opportunism pushed them into bed with all kinds of elements, including their scandalous support of black reaction in the form of the Muslim Brotherhood. Likewise, the Socialist Party of England and Wales wanted to become more popular by changing its name from Militant Labour to the more politically bland Socialist Party. These organizations, as soon as they get close to the working class, begin to adapt their propaganda to the reformist milieu within the labor movement, while at the same time elevating crude activism to a panacea. All they offer is the thin political gruel of their mass newspapers, which become increasingly reformist in character. In times of austerity, the Socialist Party, while calling for no cuts, offers sound advice to local authorities on how to tweak and balance their budgets, as if there can be a solution on a capitalist basis. In this way, they have become a mirror image of yesterday's economists by deliberately lowering the level of the working class movement and the class struggle to narrow trade unionism into a realistic struggle for petty, gradual reforms, to use Lenin's words. For the Russian economists, the workers were supposedly only interested in economic or bread-and-butter issues. Such an approach can be summed up as a workerism, an attempt to lower the political level as a shortcut to the masses. This, however, was not a proletarian tendency, despite its demagogy, but the snobbishness of intellectuals who imagined that the way to win workers is to pander to their so-called prejudices. However, such attempts to curry favor with the masses are never successful. Lenin wrote this book in late 1901 and early 1902 to answer the burning questions of our movement, about organization and at the same time criticizing the party's right wing. At this time, the Russian Marxists were grouped around their newspaper Iskra, which had waged a struggle to build the party based on sound theoretical principles. Without doubt, Lenin's book constitutes an important contribution to theory and explains the vital role of a revolutionary party as the organizer and director of the proletarian revolution. In fact, Lenin's life work was unique in understanding the essential role of the party. His genius allowed him to see far more clearly than anyone else in the movement concerning the importance of the party. For Lenin, the centralized party was essential in order to lead the masses to victory in the revolution. Lenin understood that such a party could not be improvised, since it is too late to form the organization in times of explosion and outbursts. Instead, it needed to be consciously built before such events occurred, starting with the assembling of a cadre of professional revolutionaries. Given the tasks facing the Revolutionary Party, it could not be an amateurish, loose outfit, but needed to be based upon the principles of a centralized party, known as a democratic centralism. This provided it with the most effective democratic form of organization. On this basis, following a democratic discussion within its ranks, culminating in a Congress, the majority would decide its policy and priorities. These would then become the official policy for the whole party. Lenin's conception was not new, but modeled on the example of the party of German social democracy, which he admired. He himself stressed his lack of originality at the Second Congress of RSDLP, saying he had no intentions of elevating my own formulations as given in What Is to Be Done to a programmatic level, constituting of special principles. Today it is fashionable among reformists and ex-Marxists to deny the essence of Lenin's position by attempting to present it as only valid for the considerations of Tsarist Russia at the time. But it is not correct to say that Lenin's struggle to build the Bolshevik Party was due to Russian exceptionalism. Of course, the conditions in Tsarist Russia were extremely difficult and required underground methods of work. Party congresses, for instance, could not take place inside Russia for fear of arrest and repression. That was the fate of the founding Congress of the RSDLP in 1898, where the leading participants were arrested shortly afterwards. Plekhanov's Emancipation of Labor group could only operate in exile. Likewise, Iskra had to be published abroad and smuggled back into Russia. However, Lenin's theory of organization was not determined simply by Russian conditions. It was based upon the need to build a party that could lead the working class to power. The importance of such a party is based upon historical experience. Never in history has the ruling class ever given up its power and privileges without a struggle, and that means with no holds barred. History shows that a revolutionary class requires a party and leadership which are prepared to overcome this challenge. Despite the heroic role of the masses, experience shows that without such a party, the revolution will not succeed. The importance of a Bolshevik party was demonstrated by the success of the October Revolution. Conversely, the defeat suffered by the working class over the last 100 years can be put down to the failure to build such a party. In fact, the key obstacle that stands between the working class and the victory of socialism is the unresolved problem of leadership. That is what is meant by the question of a party. Until the working class resolves this question, the conscious expression of a revolutionary process, the issue of workers' power will remain elusive. Due to the many defeats of the past and the protracted development of events in recent decades, many have abandoned all hope of building such a party. They have become skeptical and burned out. Instead of building first a cadre organization and then a party, they talk about building the movement and building the left as the way forward. They fail to understand that you cannot artificially build the movement. The movement of a working class is primarily built by great events. Incapable of understanding this, they inevitably end up in the swamp of reformism, especially its left milieu. Such types, in fact, litter today's labor movement. While Lenin's book contains many general lessons, it was specifically written in answer to concrete problems relating to the early circle period of the Russian movement. In 1907, in a preface to his writings, Lenin emphasizes this point. The basic mistake made by those who criticize what is to be done is to treat the pamphlet apart from its connection with the concrete historical situation of a definite and now long past period in the development of our party. This mistake was strikingly demonstrated, for example, by Parvis, not to mention numerous Mensheviks, who, many years after the pamphlet appeared, wrote about its incorrect or exaggerated ideas on the subject of an organization of professional revolutionaries. To maintain today that Iskra exaggerated, in 1901 and 1902, the idea of an organization of professional revolutionaries is like reproaching the Japanese after the Russo-Japanese War for having exaggerated the strength of Russia's armed forces, for having prior to the war exaggerated the need to prepare for fighting these forces. To win victory, the Japanese had to marshal all their forces against the probable maximum of Russian forces. Unfortunately, many of those who judge our party are outsiders, who do not know the subject, who do not realize that today the idea of an organization of professional revolutionaries had already scored a complete victory. That victory would have been impossible if this idea had not been pushed to the forefront at the time, if we had not exaggerated so as to drive it home to people who were trying to prevent it from being realized. Lenin went on. Iskra fought for an organization of professional revolutionaries. It fought with a special vigor in 1901 and 1902, vanquished economism and the then dominant trend, and finally created this organization in 1903. It preserved in face of the subsequent split in the Iskra's ranks and all the convulsions of a period of storm and stress. It preserved it throughout the Russian Revolution, preserved it intact from 1901 to 1902 to 1907. In fact, its preservation demonstrated its success in the victory of October 1917. When Lenin published What is to be Done in early 1902, all the supporters of Iskra welcomed its conclusions. They regarded it as an important contribution to the development of the party. However, the bitter split of the Second Congress in the summer of 1903 opened up a tirade against the book. Now differences, had come out at the Congress, and everyone who had a grudge against Iskra, against Plekhanov and Lenin, went out of his way to fan it up into a disagreement on a fundamental issue, explained Krupskaya. Lenin was attacked for his article Where to Begin and his pamphlet What is to be Done, and accused of being ambitious, and so on. It was here that the story began that Lenin's so-called elitist ideas on organization of professional revolutionaries and the like would lead to a dictatorship within the party. Subsequently, bourgeois academics and reformists have claimed that these organizational methods would ultimately lead to Stalinism, but this is completely false. Stalinism arose from the isolation of the revolution in a backward country, not some organizational norms. Homogeneity. Lenin's What is to be Done famously opens up with a quote from Lassalle to Marx from 24th of June to 1852. This is no accident and serves to set the serious tone for the rest of the book. Party struggles lend a party strength and vitality. The greatest proof of a party's weakness is its diffuseness and the blurring of clear demarcations. A party becomes stronger by purging itself. Philistines bristle at the suggestion of a purge strengthening the party, especially in light of the experience of Stalinism. The word purge has a completely different connotation today than in 1852 or 1902. The idea is that a genuinely homogeneous party is much stronger than a heterogeneous one cannot be denied. Over a period of time, the party can attract all kinds of accidental elements of alien ideas that can play a very negative role. The party is not a playground for such types. It was far better to split politically with those who were moving in the opposite direction. As Marx explained, the Revolutionary Party is a living organism which evolves at each stage of its development. The transformation from a small circle to a larger grouping leads to different methods, as does the transformation to a mass party. There is a tendency for some who played a role in one period to be left behind in a new period of organization's development. This can give rise to frictions and even splits at a certain stage. Splits can be viewed as unfortunate, but they are sometimes inevitable and even necessary. Just as a human being sheds or purges dead cells to allow new cells to grow and replace, a similar process takes place within the party.